Welcome to North Node, the yoga and astrology podcast. I'm Becky, a yoga teacher, astrologist, and businesswoman.
And I'm Laura, founder of Soul Sanctuary Studios, yoga teacher trainer, and wellness coach and consultant. In this podcast, we'll be diving into down-to-earth but deep soul conversations.
We'll explore how you can connect and stay on purpose with your true north alignment through the transformative lenses of yoga and astrology.
Each episode is designed to inspire and guide you on your own journey towards self-discovery, self-love, and personal growth. We'd really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star review on your preferred podcast platform. Your support will help us reach more listeners who are looking for insightful discussions and meaningful connection.
Thanks so much for joining us. Now, let's dive into today's episode.
Okay, so this week we are talking about the subject of money, and this can be a controversial subject, and we'll go through kind of all the feelings around money and that they can be quite polarising, can be quite a polarising topic. At the moment, we're recording this at a time where we're coming up to Christmas, and so that's always a time where, money can be something difficult because there's often lots of things that we could be spending our money on, starting with Black Friday and then Christmas going throughout. So, Beck, where would you like to start with this one today?
Yeah, I feel like given we are at that time of year, a good place might be to talk about overspending, right? Why do we overspend, especially at Christmas? But, it's a theme that can pervade the entire year. And when I was kind of sitting down and thinking about money and what we were going to talk about today, the top thing that I wrote down was around emotional spending. And why do we emotionally spend? And to me, it's like similar in a way to the reasons why we do anything emotionally that, maybe are not in alignment with our goals and our values, like emotional eating, and those type of things. And yeah, it comes from this place of emotion and trying to meet a need that we've got within. And I think at Christmas, perhaps that's bigger as well, because people spend more to express love, appreciation, or out of guilt as well. And yeah, there's this pressure, right, to come up with this perfect gift that can lead to overspending. Yeah, and we're trying to create these meaningful experiences and trying to buy our way through that. So that was kind of the first thing that I wrote down. What do you think in relation to that?
Yeah, I've been doing a little bit of how much do I spend and why do I spend and what's important to me on this. And I think something I wanted to share was like how my relationship with money has changed, which has been, I think, a sort of theme in our podcast. It's like, I remember the Dharma one, what's your relationship with Dharma? Have you trusted that everything was going to work out? Have you questioned that? How's it ebbed and flowed over the years? And certainly my relationship with money has changed quite a lot. And I think the reason for that is probably oversimplified in my mind. But if I oversimplify it, it looks like as a child, my dad was a self-made man, so he didn't have much money to start with. He always told me the story of when him and his brothers used to fight for the cereal box at home so that they could put soles of their shoes, like get insoles from the cereal box for their shoes. Like they really didn't have much. And Dad said that he was going to school and actually went to go and work as a mechanic and just kind of figured out how stuff worked, and then became a bit of an engineer and then started to design refrigeration later on, and then was very successful in that way. And he went from having, not a lot of money to quite a lot of money. And I saw how that changed him. And ultimately he did start gambling. I mean, he loved the horses and that's not unusual, but there was a bit of that going on and there was drinking going on. And, in the end, he got quite poorly and had a heart attack, and now he's not with us. And rightly or wrongly, as a child, I sort of saw that story unfold, and I blamed a lot of it on money. And, really started to play out this idea that like money is evil, and that if he didn't have all that money, maybe he wouldn't have done those things, and maybe he'd still be here. And so I had a strange relationship with money. And I remember, ironically, and you knew my investor, Becky, but we had an investor in the business, and we went out and did Tony Robbins training. And he does a section on money, and he was saying some really interesting stuff around money, and we were looking at my relationship with it. And that was really when it first came up, and I first realized that I did have some problems around it, and that if my subconscious, limiting belief was that money is evil, then unsurprisingly I wasn't attracting a lot of it to myself. And obviously sat next to my investor, he was a bit like, oh, this is a problem. And so we started to look at that, and it was really interesting. And one of the main comments that Tony Robbins said in that training, or the one that stood out for me in that section, was if you have the ability to make money, then you have the moral obligation to make as much money as humanly possible to help as many people as possible. And like, boom, that just changed my lens in an instant, because I'd always thought of money as being quite selfish, quite greedy, quite indulgent. I hadn't put together that it could be a gateway to help as many people as possible. And suddenly my drive really changed. And there was like a fire in my belly that was like, okay, now I'm interested, right? Now I'm in. And that's changed everything, to be honest, since then. And inevitably stuff has changed in terms of me becoming a parent. So I think I was pretty good before, and, in my chart would be very much like, caring for others. So other people first. And I would never kind of make money for myself. However, as soon as I had a child, I was like, okay, I'm not ashamed to make money now, because I want my child to have the best life possible. And so, yeah, I think the level of my determination around money, my energetic attraction has really changed, because now I want to attract it, whereas subconsciously before I was rejecting it. However, what I have also learned and seen over the years is that if you cheat to get money, I think money will come back and cheat you. Like, I have found that, and this is, I will hand on heart say, that's not my way of being in business. It's just never rung true to me, and I can't feel guilty about stuff. It's not worth it. But I see it in, family members, in friends, that people trying to cut corners. Yeah, it might be a quick win, and then so quickly it leaves again. And so for me, it's never been about quick wins. It's been about like attracting it and then doing the right thing with it to kind of sow seeds and cultivate it in a really like nurturing way. And obviously with the studio, that's really community based. So that's this idea that like, I'll work my ass off and try and get like as much money in by doing something that really helps people, and then put that money back into those people. And that's where my journey's changed, I suppose. So going from a place where I didn't want it to wanting it, but then using it in a way that does good, I suppose. Yeah, what's your relationship been, Beck? What's your journey been?
Yeah, I mean, I've never had particular issues with money. Actually, until I really started my yoga journey in a lot of ways, because I'd always kind of worked hard, earned money, been able to keep hold of it and like support myself in life. But then kind of when I went down more of a yogic path, and I think this can be true for a lot of people, when you start to take that spiritual journey, as you were sort of saying, and with your relationship with your dad, there can be then this negativity around money, which is obviously for a different reason. But yeah, I think I went down the money is evil route for a little while. And that can be like a bit of a spiritual cul-de-sac in a way, that you go down thinking, yeah, I don't need money to be happy, and all the best things in life are free, and they are. And I just wrote down, I read a quote the other day that Coco Chanel said, the best things in life are free, but the next best things are very expensive. And it kind of made me smile when I read that. And as I started to go further down my spiritual journey and really think about actually money being a form of energy, and yeah, also obtaining that understanding that you spoke about, that the more money that I could earn ethically and then spend in a way that made a difference, The more that I could do that, the better. And yeah, also then associating money with karma, like this idea of how we earn money and create money for ourselves and our families is important. And that honest kind of ethical earning aligns with positive karma. Whereas if you are deceitful, exploitative, then that's going to create negative karma. So, and then this idea again that the more money we can earn that's in alignment with our dharma, our life purpose, which is our ethical duty, then the more we can build a prosperous life that nourishes ourselves and others without causing harm, which then, you know, you're starting to weave in that teaching of non-harm as well. So yeah, in some ways, my journey with money was easy. And then, yeah, I sort of did go down that little cul-de-sac of sort of being a bit anti-money for a little while. So yeah, similar in a way to yours?
Yeah, it's interesting. And I mean, I guess in a way, I think it's important to sometimes get to that cul-de-sac maybe, and sometimes reach a point where you go, you know, I see it in so many yoga teachers, right? They kind of get there too, and then they realize it's not that great being there. Not that great, not just because it's not fun and not having money is harder than having money, but it really impacts our energy. Energetically, we can feel kind of spent, you know, and then we can't pour from that cup. So I think it's really important to talk about the energetics of money, because we can often think that, you know, money is the energy, but actually it's not, is it? I mean, it's what we do with it. It's like, you know, we all have words, but it's how we use them. And it's the same with money. It's how do we use it, which really makes the difference. And I try, like, it's been such a journey. I mean, when my parents split up, obviously dad was very wealthy and mum not. And, you know, she had to be really brave and kind of and leave. And then she got a job and, you know, she'd never worked. And that was really interesting. That was a new lesson to me, you know, women working and mum kind of making her own way, and us kind of like borrowing houses from estate agents and just trying to like figure it out. And yet dad was paying private school fees, so I was at this like expensive school, and yet living with mum in like, you know, these tiny kind of borrowed houses with not a lot. And so there's always been this like polarity for me, but I'm glad of that, because it will always keep me grounded. I will always, you know, be a way that I really appreciate money, and I really understand when people don't have it. And obviously not to an extent where there are, you know, some people in the world that don't have money. I'm not going to try and suggest that I've experienced that, but I think being grounded with it is really, really important. And mum and I often laugh, because obviously I got, you know, this corporate job, and like it was like, you know, the golden handshake, and you stay there and you're on the grad scheme and you kind of know where you're going with it. Financially, you'd be safe. And I jumped to do yoga because I think what also comes hand in hand with this money thing is, for me, it's like authenticity, it's truth, and it's frequency. And it's the idea that, like, if you follow your passion and you're doing good, like that frequency is so powerful, that truth in your teaching, the way that you connect with someone, you can't really put a price tag on that. You can start, you know, living and working in a way that you enjoy and that feels good and that's helping people, and then abundance does flow because energetically you're on path. Whereas I also feel like, you know, they say, don't they, if it's feeling hard, it's because the universe wants you to move, right? It's like, if it's feeling really difficult, then, you know, it's because you're not supposed to be doing it. So it's about kind of, yeah, just taking all of these messages and seeing that money is something energetic rather than something that necessarily holds, you know, the power itself. Becca, I was going to ask you, like, do you think that people are more prone, like, are they luckier or not luckier, if you like, depending on their birth chart? Does that play a part in this?
Yeah, definitely. You know, like with the North and the South Node placements, often someone who's got a South Node in Leo, you know, Leo as a sign can represent royalty, but it's certainly a sense of like abundance and having enough. So very often, if your South Node is in Leo, this is just an example, obviously there are lots of other placements, then the chances are you're going to be born into this world like with more than enough. And then maybe your path, because the North Node is always opposite, like where does the soul want to evolve towards, is perhaps about living a simpler life and perhaps breaking that karmic bondage that might exist with money, and kind of growing a mentality that is less attached to money. So, and the opposite could be true, you know, someone with a South Node in something like Taurus, maybe they've lived a simpler life and they're here to, and also had to work hard for that. Like Taurus is, you know, the sign of the bull, like doing a simple job to earn money and things like that. Maybe they're here to do something different. So, you know, I do believe like everyone has the ability to manifest money in this lifetime. But, you know, there are certain placements in your chart that is probably going to mean that for some people that's easier than others. And again, also placements like Jupiter being the planet that represents abundance and expansion. You know, if that is in, say, Taurus is the sign that can, in some ways, represent material wealth. So you've got like Taurus, material wealth, and then Jupiter like amplifying that, or Venus also in some ways represents money and what we value. So yeah, for sure, you could normally look at someone's chart and sort of tell to a certain extent what kind of relationship they may have with money. Although, you know, like anything, there are shadow aspects and kind of the gift aspect. So I think it's also worth saying like money, too much money and attachment to money can also be a problem, right?
Yeah, totally. And I think that's where we've kind of, for me, it feels like we've gone a bit full circle in the way that I think in the old way it used to be, you know, someone was very successful if they had a lot of money, right? It was pretty black and white and everybody wanted lots of money. And then maybe, this is just my experience, but maybe like, you know, they have some sort of spiritual awakening and then they feel like the way is to have no money and to like detach from that completely. And actually, you know, we're always trying to find the middle way, aren't we? Buddha talks about the middle way, and it's like not having, you know, the two polarities. It's not about having it all, it's not about having none, but it is about living in a way that is healthy and energetically, you know, in a good space. And that's why I think yoga is, you know, so practical, because yes, it's designed for this higher consciousness, right? But it's also designed so that it helps us live a comfortable lifestyle. And they often talk about these 4 components of a fulfilling life. So you have spiritual growth, meaningful work, pleasure, and prosperity. And so, okay, the expansion of awareness is like the primary goal of yoga. And as our consciousness expands, so does our ability to deal with everyday life, right? So that we can live healthily and happily. But money is incorporated within that, you know, that's part of our everyday life. So in yoga, you've got, for example, different styles. You have hatha yoga, which is like making sure that your body is working in good order. You've got karma yoga, which is about serving others. And then you have padmini yoga, which is about making money. Okay. And there's like this whole practice in yoga, which is about making money. So this idea when yoga teachers like believe that they're being the best yoga teacher because they're not charging anything at all, that would be lovely, wouldn't it? You know, and back when there were communities where you literally lived in a community and you would do energy exchange. So one person would cook and then one person would do yoga and one person would do the washing and one person, fine, a whole different situation. And yes, you wouldn't need to be charged for yoga then because you wouldn't have to pay for food or you wouldn't have to pay for shelter because everybody had their role in the community. But those communities don't exist anymore, at least not in the Western world too much. And we have mortgages, you know, and we have children to feed and we have to pay for food. We're not growing it ourselves. So therefore we do have to charge. And, you know, yoga being this very practical way of living does give us tools to do that. And it's interesting, but when you look at like where yoga came from in India, it's like, India's British conquerors considered that subcontinent as the jewel in the crown. So and huge sums of money were looted from India, and they funded the expansion of the British Navy and, made England the queen of the seas. It was like there was a lot of wealth from where yoga came from, right? And according to Forbes, India has 36 billionaires, more than any other country in Asia. And the next runner-up, Japan, has 24. So there's so many teachers out there that think to be a good yoga teacher, you've got to have no money, but that's actually not even where it came from, and so you may have heard that, if you're studying yoga for a while, you might have heard of the siddhis. So these siddhis are they're known as these psychic powers, so the ability to heal others and maybe predict the future in some ways. And then you have the riddhis. So this is the ability to read thoughts, they call it. And then you've got Padmini Vidya, they say, which is the science of the nidhi. So these are these subtle forces which are used to attract large amounts of money. It's called, nidhis means the container of treasure. And some people are born with the ability to manipulate, consciously or unconsciously, these intangible energies, and so materialize assets, wealth, essentially. But others could develop these mental powers necessarily to control those nidhis after years of practice. But what they're saying is that these nidhis are just like money, can be a blessing but also a curse, because it's what you're doing with the money that has the effect. It's not having the money itself. So it's I think a lot of this, the Bible, St. Paul says, the love of money is the root of all evil. And it's not money itself that he's actually condemning. He's just warning against this self-centered approach, hoarding or greed, as we call it. So it's not money itself. It's what we're doing with it. And yoga has a really amazing way of looking at that from a karmic perspective. So, the more we give, the more that we receive, essentially. And there's, it's called Lakshmi Tantra, which is a huge text, and it's devoted to inner and outer well-being, but it encourages to basically earn a living through honest and lawful means, right? And there are, huge practices based on giving, and that's part of some of this culture, and Indian culture specifically around, charity and really giving back to the community. And that's what we need to be really focusing on. It's not how much money we have, but how much are we giving? And then energetically, karmically, what we'll receive to continue to give. But unfortunately, what we tend to have, especially over in the West, is I want as much money for me to buy as many shiny things that I can for me. And then, there's just no great energetic development or personal growth within there at all. And, often that, I think can lead to disease. And that's when we see people getting sick, because energetically that's something toxic that's happening. And I know I see it all the time. It's Adam and I have this way of being with money, and people might say it's we've been through really hard times and we've still done it. So it's easy to say, oh, that's easy when you've got money, but I will never count who owes what. I'll never go out for dinner with someone and be well, you got this, so I'll get this. No way. We do not live like that. And it's interesting, when we're with other family members, and, they might be married, and it'll be oh yeah, well, he did, the shop last week, so I'm doing it this week, and he bought nappies, so I'm buying this. And it's how do you live like that? And it is each to their own. But for me and for ads, it's very much about give and you'll receive. And that's not why we're giving, but it's just not having a fear. It's not being in that lack mindset that there's not enough, so I'm going to keep it all to myself, and we're going to keep tabs, and that comes from a really fearful negative state. And in my experience, that's just not what's going to attract more to you. And when you can loosen the fear around it and give more openly than karmically, you're going to receive more, is at least my belief system.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I like to think of money, a bit like the ocean, in that, the waves go out and then they come in again automatically. But if you're trying to stop the waves, you're just completely stopping the flow, right? And yeah, you were talking about giving, and yeah, I think in yoga there's this idea of seva, isn't there, and service and duty. to give to other people that might need it in a way that's really helpful. So, you know, yeah, it's something that I do a lot, and maybe it might be helpful for like our listeners to talk about like some of those things that maybe we do personally. So I really like in certain supermarkets now, they've started to do like bags of things where they're the things that the homeless people might need the most in that week. And then, you know, it's like £10 or £5 or whatever, and you can just pick one up, put it in your basket and pay, rather than like trying to remember to collect random items, having looked at a list that maybe homeless people need. You know, I think it's about society trying to remove the barriers. So that's something I try and actively do when I go to the supermarket, for instance. And yeah, I've also like never lived my life in a way where I'm counting somebody owes me that, or like you say, when you go out for dinner, like being worried about those things, because again, I think it disrupts the flow of energy as well. What else was I thinking as you were talking? Oh yeah, like at the moment, the day that we're recording this, like towards the end of November, we've had quite a big astrological shift happen this week. And so whenever you're listening to this podcast, this is going to be relevant, because Pluto, which is the planet that's furthest away from us in the solar system, has just shifted signs from Capricorn into Aquarius. And this is definitely something that's going to impact wealth and the way that we view money going forwards. And so whichever sign Pluto has moved into, we can expect a big transformation through that sign over like a 20-year period. So Pluto in Capricorn was very much about like traditional success. And like Capricorn likes to know that it's got enough for the future. So it's about long-term planning and that kind of thing. And Pluto in Aquarius looks a lot more like community and making sure that our actions serve the collective. So there's a whole shadow to deal with here in terms of the way like financial institutions are run and things like that. But essentially, we're going to be shifting a lot more towards this idea of service and seva, and making sure that everyone is cared for, and everyone has enough. So I think it's going to be really interesting to like see how that plays out over the next 20 years. Yeah.
And it feels like quite aligned with the way that the world is moving in general. You know, it's just like raising this collective consciousness, you know, our frequency much more into the feminine, isn't it? It's like, yeah, the giving and the nurturing, rather than the kind of the holding on to and the greed, you know, the more mindset. So we're moving away from that, which is really nice to see. I think you've got a bit more to share, haven't you, Beck, around the masculine and the feminine sides of money?
Yeah. So when we think about money and keeping hold of money, you know, that's very much like a feminine idea in a way. You know, the feminine is the receptor. So feminine energy at its core really is about receptivity, flow, nurturing, also intuition. So when we view money through this lens, it can transform from like this tool of control or power into something that we are just meant to receive, hold, and circulate. You know, this idea of flow again, in harmony with our own personal values and our purpose, our dharma. So some ways that feminine energy relate to our ability to receive and hold money. Feminine energy like really thrives in openness and receptivity. You know, those qualities that we were talking about, like when you go out for dinner. But if you've got issues with like receiving money or keeping hold of money, then it's really, you've really got to look at the underlying emotions and energetics below that, which might actually come down to guilt, shame, or like self-worth, feelings of unworthiness. So those are the places to go around that. And then I think also the other thing to touch on here is like this societal conditioning that is there in the world at the moment that's tied to our worth in relation to how hard we work, how much we sacrifice, how much we don't see our children. And, you know, I was sort of guilty of this earlier in life in some ways as well, or how little we actually take for ourselves. Whereas when we move more into our feminine, we can let go of those narratives and simply recognize that receiving is natural, it's deserved. And, you know, we are all worthy wherever we've come from, just for being a human being, you know? And feminine energy, like, it's not just about receiving it as well. It's about being able to hold it. I think I've used this analogy before of like the feminine being the water in the glass. And so you can almost think of money in a way as a type of feminine energy. It's an energy that needs to be cared for and directed with love. So that's not about like trying to control every penny. But if you were to ask yourself, like, what's your relationship with money like? If you had to write one word down to describe your relationship with money, what would that be? Would it be, you know, around fear or scarcity or thinking that money is evil? But when you care for money and direct it with love, you create a more healthy way of holding it. And that doesn't mean hoarding it, but cultivating this sense of trust that what you have is enough and that can grow in alignment with your purpose. So it's about sort of really working with the energetics of safety and abundance within and self-worth. And then we can also think of money, I like to think, you know, we talk about like the feminine cycle as well. And money's a bit like that in a way. It thrives in this sense of flow, which we've kind of talked about a little bit. And also like the phases of the moon and phases of nature, the seasons. So when we can see that like money has to go out and then trust that it will come back in. And trusting this flow, like for me, has really changed my relationship with money, because it prevents scarcity mindset that blocks abundance and also stops this natural rhythm. So, you know, some of the biggest investments that I've made in my life have actually been in myself, you know, through doing, trainings and things like that. And there's always that moment where you're thinking, oh my God, I'm about to spend whatever amount of money, $2,000, $3,000, whatever it is, on this training. And if you've ever been in that position and then not made the investment, like what stopped you from doing that would be the question that I would ask. Because when you back yourself in that way with money, I feel like you start to trust yourself more. You create this flow of energy and, you know, you earn that money back in some way later, or you receive that money. You know, it's not always about earning it. There are lots of ways actually to receive money. And often when we make those big investments, they can be a huge activation for us, you know. And I think one of the things we should probably talk about, you've touched on it a little bit with like, what do we charge for a yoga class or a yoga teach training or whatever? You know, whatever, if ever you're pricing anything or considering the price of something that you're about to buy or service that you're about to invest in, I think it's really important to consider like the energetic exchange in that. You know, if you're thinking that something is expensive and you're committed to doing it, then you're going to receive a lot more often than maybe something that's free. You know, I have in my business, for example, like done free masterclasses and things like that. And what you find is people sign up for them and they don't do them, you know, because they're free. Whereas when people have got some skin in the game, you know, they show up for themselves. So that's something really interesting to reflect on as well.
And that shows up really literally with statistics in terms of class bookings, and we can see that. So you put on, let's say, as a yoga teacher, you're going to offer a free class, and you might get loads of bookings, but you'll get low attendance because they haven't, as you say, put any skin in the game. So if they don't fancy it, and let's be honest, the minute you get home and get on the sofa, it's hard work to get your leggings in and get yourself back out to yoga. If they haven't paid for it, they're not going to come. If they've even just paid a £5, they'll get their leggings on because they've paid for it. So what it shows is that you might get slightly less bookings with a lower price class, but you'll get much higher attendance than a free class. Stats will show you that over and over again. And what I love about our training is like what I put in the training is all the stuff that I wish I'd had in mine like 12 years ago now. But we have the Business of Yoga module, which talks a lot about stuff like this. And a big question that always comes up, as you say, Beck, is what should I charge for my classes? And there is so many like trains of thought around this. So your most obvious one, which is what most people go to, is they just do a Google search, what's everyone else charging? I'll charge that. And for me, that is like a little bit irrelevant because what do you need to charge? How many hours have you got left in your week? And how much money do you need to make in those hours? And then you've got to charge that. There is absolutely no point you looking at what, Jenny's charging for her classes, and then you charge that and it doesn't make ends meet for you. You're not going to be able to sustain it, right? And I remember doing my Yoga Nidra training, and people were asking, because Yoga Nidra is a really interesting one, right? People are lying down doing nothing. So really hard to figure out what to charge for that, because you're essentially reading or learning, if you like, a script, but you're holding space. And to try and convince people that, they should pay a couple £100 for you to watch them sleeping is, I would say, quite a difficult challenge. And so people on that training were particularly worried about, well, what should I charge for this? And he literally was like, I do the maths and I go, how much does my mortgage cost? And how many hours have I got in my week? And if I'm going to give an hour away, that's what I'm going to charge. And if people want me for that hour, they'll pay it. And if they're not willing to pay that, then I don't want them as a client. And he was so cut and dry about it that it was pretty inspiring. I was like, yeah, okay. And I mean, if you don't feel, the flip side of the coin is worthiness, isn't it? If you don't feel worthy or authentic to be charging that, like, do some work, do some studying, do some training, which gets you to a point where you feel like you can charge that. And then you're ready to earn the living that you need to support the lifestyle, doing the thing that you want, right? So it's really difficult. I mean, a yoga teacher in general, you look at a gym, they're making what, 20, 25 quid, maybe 30 quid an hour. Pretty difficult, at times to make a living off that. But if you start finding your authenticity, teaching in a way that's really true to you, running workshops, where people are maybe, I don't know, paying 20, 30 quid a class, and you've got, 10, 15, 20 people in there, you might be making 600 quid for a couple of hours. That's a very different ballgame. But that comes from self-worth, and that comes from real authentic experience. So like anything, to gain that experience and to gain that true confidence, you're probably going to have to put in the hours, and maybe you do your teaching alongside a job for a while until you do a training or you gain the experience where you start going, yeah, I feel like I could do that, I'm ready for that. And when that is really true, then people will pay for that service, and as your mastery increases, then you can charge in a way that feels right for you, and that's when things really change. But I think as well, this is testament to sticking at something. It's like, my husband and I have spoken about this a lot, because in some ways he's like a bit of a magpie. Something shiny will come up and he'll be like, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that. The problem with that is that you're never going to be a master in anything. And I feel mastery is the thing that means you can charge for it. Like, I feel very confident, and all day long I'm having calls with people and can say, for over a decade now, I've been doing this work, and there's not a lot I haven't seen yet in the like yoga teaching realm of, people who are leaving jobs or leaving relationships or trying to be a yoga teacher or having a break from yoga teaching or got an injury or whatever. We've seen it all, because we've had hundreds of people through a training. We've been doing it for 10 years, which means that I can legitimately charge what I feel is right for that training. And so you've got to kind of put in the work and then get to a point where you authentically feel like you can charge that. And then, not sort of lower the price too much, I believe, because there are people out there who need those junior teachers who will pay less, and there are people out there who need more senior teachers who can pay more. And that's kind of how the world should work. I mean, I've seen it with my corporate clients in the way that I would kind of take anything going when I started started teaching. And then as the relationships have unfolded, and I've been really clear with my experience around, well, you need this insurance and you need these booking systems and you need this and that and the other. And if they go, yeah, I think we might just get like a local kid to come and do a class for a couple of quid, you see it fall down, you see it not work, because you need experience, and that means it requires hours and they need to pay for that. So you end up letting some clients go, and then you get clients that you really want to work with who are, proper, invested in wellness or whatever it might be. So it takes time and it takes dedication, and it's all meant to be for the teachers that are meant to have it at the time. But you've got to charge, your worth. And I think to do that, you've got to do the work to make you believe that that is your worth. And yoga has some Yoga Alliance are really useful around this, and kind of like ethical standards of what we should be charging. If you want a kind of guideline, it's really interesting around a 200-hour training, like always around £2,000. And why? Because it's 200 hours, it's £10 an hour. I mean, you trying to tell me that in a 200-hour training, you're not getting more value than £10 an hour? I mean, that stuff is transformative. It's like I meet people who are walking down the street and I'm like, God, they need to do their yoga training, right? Because it's a way of being. It changes your way of being in a way that means that you are healthier and happier for the rest of your life. You wouldn't pay £10 an hour for that, so it's about, also just really understanding, as you said, Beck, like the value of what you're paying for and investing in yourself. Because once you start doing trainings that improve your self-worth and your knowledge, then you're going to be able to charge more. So that's going to come back to you more quickly anyway.
Yeah. And I think, confidence plays a huge part in all of this as well. We see a lot of teachers get qualified and, they still don't feel confident. And if you don't feel confident, then you're not going to charge the money. So I think, how do you build confidence? Well, you got to keep doing the thing, exactly as you said, to build this mastery. But also, I'd like to give a perspective of someone who kind of works in corporate in a different environment as well. And I've done probably thousands of end of year reviews with people over the years. And, a lot of men don't find it hard to come to their annual appraisal, their salary review, whatever, and ask for what they want. That's not always the case for the women in the workplace. You kind of open the discussion, and the thing that I always like to do is ask people what they want, because then you kind of know where you're starting from. And I don't want to insult somebody, or, obviously there's that thing in business as well where you don't necessarily want to pay somebody more than they think they're worth, to be honest and truthful about that.
Business.
And quite often you get women who will come to their review and they won't ask for what they want, or they just fluff their words around it. And so I'm here saying to you, if you're a woman and you're, we're coming up to December, maybe you've got annual appraisals, do your research, make sure that you know what you could get somewhere else in the marketplace for your role. And if you think that you're good at your role, go in and ask for what you want. What's the worst that can happen? And I can almost guarantee that even if you don't get what you asked for, you're going to get more than if you didn't ask for anything in 99% of cases. And also then I think it will lead you on to the question, does this company really value me? And if they do, then they'll pay you for what you're asking for, or they should be setting you out with the development that you need in order to achieve what you want. And I think these messages are so important to give to people, because there are so many women not asking for what they want. We still have this huge gender pay gap in the UK. And, you've got to do your bit towards that as well. And I think there are some reasons why men do often find it easier to ask for money and navigate money and financial systems. And this is for a whole lot of reasons, a whole variety of historical, psychological reasons as well. But it's largely shaped by cultural conditioning and kind of the innate dynamics of masculine and feminine energy. You know, for centuries, men had greater access to financial systems, education, property, even economic opportunity. And often, you know, it's not only probably going back a couple of generations where women were historically excluded from financial decision making and dependent on men for economic survival. So this historical imbalance still, first of all, influences societal expectation, but also internalized belief systems from, you know, just literally within our DNA and our bloodline. So men have had a lot more time to normalize money as a resource they control, and women are still unlearning societal conditioning. And the way that we do that is we ask for what we want. We understand our self-worth. And then I think, you know, there is stuff around masculine and feminine energy here in terms of the way that we show up in the world. Masculine energy thrives on action, control, structure, which really aligns with traditional financial systems, earning money, investing and saving. And society still rewards these traits, and it reinforces this sense of competence and confidence in men when it comes to money. Feminine energy, by contrast, is about flow and receptivity, which doesn't always fit the rigid modern financial system framework. And women often have to balance these natural feminine traits with societal kind of pressures to compete in a masculine dominated financial world. And I know nowadays, like, men can do what were traditionally female jobs and vice versa, but there are a lot more women working in the traditionally female jobs. And this is why there's a gender pay gap, you know, because they are not the kind of jobs that align with the traditional financial system. You know, if you've got a male doing a job, you know, and I'm thinking about in construction, they have to deliver a project, they have to meet a certain financial target or something like that. Whereas women, and I'm going to use like very stereotypical examples, but a woman working as a nurse or a midwife, like how do you measure her performance? And yes, you can try and put like statistics around it, but you just simply cannot measure the care that, you know, that woman is providing in that environment. And yet we try to. And this is then how those roles that are about caring, nurturing, using intuition are just not as highly valued. And so, you know, I was talking earlier about Pluto moving into Aquarius, and I hope that this will be one of the sort of changes that we make in the collective as we move forward. And then I think kind of men aren't taught to fear wealth. Wealthy men are often seen as successful, admirable, and wealthy women are sometimes criticized as being selfish. You know, maybe they don't have children, or maybe they do and they, like me, you know, have to leave their children and rely on other women to take care of them. They're too ambitious. And these narratives are not helpful. They can create subconscious blocks in women who might fear that judgment, isolation, or simply losing connection to others if they pursue a career or in some way financial abundance. So often women, in a way, downplay their financial success to avoid making others uncomfortable. I know that I've done that definitely at times. While men don't seem to feel like that, you know, it's a bit more acceptable for, you know, men to be like a little bit more flashy like that. So yeah, those were some of the things that I wanted to talk about around that.
So important for everyone to hear that, actually, women, but also men, hopefully. As you were talking, I was like smiling because it's interesting that in India, so they've got this deity called Lakshmi, and it's a woman. It's a woman with coins streaming from her hands, which represents money. And she's the deity that reminds people that money is not just something to be enjoyed, but it should be honored. And that affluence should be respected because it's a Shakti, a powerful stream of energy that can quickly reshape your reality, either positively or negatively, depending on how you use it. So interesting that their deity is a woman. And yeah, again, I mean, they talk about that you need like focus and ability to make money. So actually something that is to be admired in a way if you're using it in the right way. And I would say like my personal growth has absolutely correlated directly to my like personal income. The more I work on myself and develop myself as a person, the more money that comes my way. And that is definitely directly connected to self-worth. And it's interesting, like I see, I remember becoming a yoga teacher and jumping, and I think I've spoken about this in a previous episode where like, my mum would be like, oh, Laura's just a yoga teacher now. There'd be like this and, she just does a little bit of yoga. And there have been times, and there are times where I'm now financially, supporting mum through little old yoga. And it's like, yeah, the more that you become a master and stick at something, and the more that you work at yourself and your self-development, like, you may find that quickly some of these kind of older traditions kind of fall away a little bit, and that some of these more modern ways of like using that energetic charge around money really just bowls the rest of it over. It's really interesting when I was doing some research around this about looking at like karma. So individuals can generate their own merit, right? So, and karma, but karma is a collective force. So if a whole family creates good karma through combined spiritual practice, then they're saying that, that's when that whole family is likely to receive more wealth. And there's lots of spiritual practices around this, like chanting and honoring and offerings that you can give, to these deities like Lakshmi. And it's really interesting how kind of seriously, in a way, people devote, their energy towards money to be able to receive it and respect it. And I just don't think we do that so much in the West. Like, it's really interesting. I think we spend quite frivolously, and then we're quite aggressive with the way that we earn, but there's not the like love and respect and the giving and of money that it feels like it should be revered in a way that is a privilege to have and to use, rather than just something to kind of burn and then be really grasping over all the time. And do you know what I like when I reflected on like my relationship with money, and I was like, what do I spend my money on? And to be honest, I'm a big saver, like, which probably says something. And I do think there's, you can kind of look at your ways of being. I mean, when my parents split up, my mum had nothing because, she didn't have her savings. And so obviously now I'm like, right, I'm going to have that independence. So you can kind of see where that comes from. But, like if I was to spend money, let's like say clothes, for example, because that's kind of where people's minds go to. Vinted has been like a game changer for me, not because I necessarily want secondhand clothes, but energetically for me, do you know what? I can't stand the thought of all these new clothes being made. Like, I don't care what I spend on Vinted. It's not about the money. It's about the fact that I want to use something that already exists, because otherwise it's like the pollution. Like, I think that's what, I don't know, maybe that I don't know if that's why people use Vinted, but for me, that's a really big pull. Like, I don't mind spending money on Vinted, but energetically, I like where I'm putting my money. Like, if I'm going to buy myself clothes, I don't want to buy new clothes anymore because I feel like I'm just damaging the planet. So that's where, maybe that's just how I legitimize spending money on Vinted, but that's where my mind is at, and is an example, I think, of the energy behind money. It's not necessarily like how much you spend, but it's where are you putting it, and is it helping energetically?
Yeah, that's very like Pluto in Aquarius, and I think Vinted has like massively taken off, hasn't it, in the last few years? A lot of people talk about Vinted. And I think, another example might be like I spend more probably on stuff like cleaning products because I choose to buy like ethically better products, ones that don't harm the environment, or with minimal packaging and things like that as well. So I think, that's so true. It's like where you choose to place your money, where it is energy. Where are you placing that energy? And one of the best books that I've read around money, if people are interested, is a book called It's Not Your Money by Tosha Silver. And she kind of bridges this kind of Western culture with money and more of an Eastern mentality with money, and makes it like really accessible and really easy to understand. But really the whole premise of the book is that money doesn't belong to us. It's energy. And so it's part of the natural flow of the universe. And so when we release this, what essentially is illusion of ownership and control, then we automatically align with the natural abundance that flows from the universe. And also by like releasing this idea that it is our money, something that we have to own. For a lot of people, they struggle to keep hold of money. And much of our anxiety around money stems from the belief that we are alone, or kind of, alone in having to generate and protect it. And then that perpetuates this cycle of fear and scarcity. So anyway, that's a really good book that kind of covers a lot of the things that we've talked about today.
Yeah, I think it's a really important topic to become comfortable with, to explore within yourself and figure out, what is your limiting belief around money? And in a simple way, isn't it? When you answer the question, money is, what's the first word that comes up for you? And then looking into that a little bit and seeing how it's playing out for you. But yeah, really worth exploring.
Yeah, it was a great chat today, and I hope it's been helpful for people.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Your time is precious, and we truly appreciate you spending it with us. We look forward to having you join us again soon. So, take care, and we'll catch you in the next episode.